So how should you go about training your doubles defense?
So Dean, for example, I'm a player who's maybe wanting to improve on my defense. I've got a friend who's happy to come down and do some training with me. How should I go about training my doubles defense?
I think it's always good when we start any session to almost have a quick technical check, because we want to make sure that we're set up correctly before we go straight into kind of maybe doing open style routines where we're under a little bit more stress. So if we quickly just go through the doubles defense setup, starting with the legs, we want to feel that we've got a nice low base. The reason for this is because we're expecting the shuttle to come in the downwards direction, so nice and low. Racket legs slightly set back, and what this does is it allows us much more room on its inside hip, which is considered a much harder shot to defend from. Then if we start to kind of work up into the racket bevel grip, the reason we have this bevel grip is it's much more universal. We can cover a much bigger range of shots using that grip. And then finally, just trying to feel like our elbow and our racket is sitting kind of away from our body, and that creates this space here. And it's not to say we necessarily have to use that space all the time, but we have the option. We don't want to feel like we're too tucked, nice and stretched. Then look into that for the setup.
And I think the big reason why we start with like a little technical check is a lot of the stuff down the line, different shots we want to be doing, all stems from a good sort of base position, having that good technical kind of everything going, working the right way. So focusing on that first is so important. So Dean, using that setup, how would we go about hitting the drive?
So it's very important that we have a loose grip. That's obviously very important. Sometimes when we're defending, people get too tight because they feel like they're under pressure, and then we lose the ability to kind of to squeeze the grip. Okay, so nice light grip pressure from here. A quick small pullback. We don't want to feel like we're coming too far around the body, and it's all about kind of feeling like we're using that squeeze with the grip and the wrist to kind of feel like we're punching that shuttle back, rather than trying to feel like it's a big arm movement where we lack a lot of power.
And that sort of comes back to that one, we spoke about it, the sort of base position where our elbow's nice out. You've created that lovely room that you can then pull back, not with the elbow, you're pulling back with the wrist here. And that is what we can get that real whip in that we need for the drive. So how do we go about training for this? Well, we've got a really nice little exercise here. All we need is about 10 shuttles, doesn't really matter. As a feeder here, I'm going to be standing slightly in front of Dean, and he's going to be getting it into his defensive position. Now, from here, I'm just going to be gently throwing the shuttle slightly towards him, allowing him to then drive that shuttle straight. I'm not throwing this at a pace. I want to give him enough time to reset into each position each time so we can hit that drive. So we have looked at the basics of the technique, and that's something we always just have to keep checking, making sure nothing's creeping into bad habits. And then we've looked at that in very much in a static position, Dean. Now we want to add more stress to it and make sure it holds up. What's a good routine for this?
I think what we want to try and probably progress into is a 1v1 routine where it feels a little bit more of a match situation. So a routine that I quite like to start with is almost one player at the net, hitting down at the defender, and then the defender just taking their normal position. And their goal is to try and maintain the drive and try and keep the rally going for as long as possible.
How hard then as a player am I trying to hit this drive as well? Because that's something we haven't really spoken about. How hard do we want to hit the drive?
I think the drive, we want to feel like we're definitely trying to bypass what would be the net player. So we don't want to feel like the goal for the defender isn't to feed the net player.
Yeah.
It's the net player feeding the defender, and it's up to them to kind of maintain the rally. So as a driver, I don't want to feel like I'm just keeping the rally going too much, but trying to feel like I'm punching it past the net player, and they're very much in the way of my shot rather than kind of playing it to where they're standing.
I think that's maybe one of the things we see a lot in this exercise is it's very nice back and forth when actually you've got to make it hard for that net player, and it's good practice for that net player then as well, and when you switch you can then practice your net stuff. So it's a great exercise all round. So now we're adding more stress to this defensive position, Dean. What things can we tend to see creep in these little bad habits?
I think we mentioned it earlier that sometimes when people are defending, we have this concept that we're under pressure, that we're almost losing the rally, and then people then get tight and everything locks up. And as we said earlier, in the way of the drive, we have to feel like we have this looseness and this snap. Now if we get too tense, everything gets locked and it almost feels like just an arm movement, and that is where we will then lack the power. It becomes very much a different exercise. The second one is making sure having this rebound is very important, because we're trying to keep a pace on the shot where we're looking at drives. What we don't want is to feel like as we're hitting through, this racket finishes all the way over here, because the net player is now intercepting that shuttle. So the chance of us being able to get back into here become very slim. So we're almost overtraining this rebound. We're almost trying to feel like it's really short, sharp, so we can feel like we can keep that rally going for a lot longer.
And then I know one I often see with a lot of the players I work with is this elbow position. We often start this lovely position here, might hit 1 or 2 drives, but then it starts creeping back. And that's when you see a lot of defenders, they get caught doing this sort of action because there's no room for them to swing. So just getting used to, same with the kind of you were talking about, staying nice and relaxed and keeping this swing coming back, allowing this elbow just to stay out, and we're just hitting with that wrist. So far we've mainly just focused on the drive, Dean. The most common shot, probably for a reason though, because it's the most kind of natural, it's a reactive shot. If we're not too sure in defense, we just tend to slap at something. And a big thing about defense is there has to be a reason for every shot. There has to be a reason we've hit that drive. And also we need to be able to utilize other areas of the court. The net, for example, a great place to maybe get some counter attack on, get your opponent lifting. And for that, we need a block.
Yeah.
So how do we go about hitting a block?
So, I mean, probably first we want to talk about the setup again. It doesn't change. We have this setup regardless of what shot we are hitting. In the way of how we hit this versus the drive, we looked at a lot of kind of snapping with the wrist, squeezing the grip. The block is very much using the pace that's coming at us and almost cushioning the shot. So we're not really looking to do too much in the way of squeezing the grip or using our wrist. It's more about still trying to feel like we're getting behind the shuttle quickly, because we still have to remember that their shot is the same pace. We can't move slowly back because we're playing something soft. We still have to be quick behind the shuttle. It's more of a light guide. So my grip pressure will probably stay the same this time. I'm not looking to squeeze the grip. It's all about kind of a small controlled pendulum arm movement, just to feel like we can then take the pace out of that shot.
And I think if you saw Dean sort of acting it out there, the big thing he did was he was still coming through. And a common mistake we see with people here is leaning back, almost trying to cushion the pace this way, when actually a lot of it is just from that wrist, being really soft in your hands, soft in that shot, and feeling sort of that guiding of the shot.
And obviously for this shot, the reason that's so important is, as you already said, David, actually this is a good counter-attack shot. So if our body weight's going backwards on this block, and we hit it, the first thing we're gonna have to do before we can even start to move is to sort our body weight out. We don't have the time to do that, but if we feel like we're kind of coming in, we can just maintain that movement, start to close down the net.
So now we want to start adding this into our training, into a routine, and actually we can use that previous routine we did on the drives to sort of build this defense. So we're going to get into the exact same setup with one player at the net. Dean's getting his defensive position, nice and ready in the same sort of setup position as well, starting by hitting some drives, and then he has that option to play the block, follow it in, and this is where we get that tactical element as well. He's hitting his drives. We spoke about the pace earlier on. He wants to hit those nice and hard, putting pressure on this net player so they can't move too close to the net, and then that opens up the space to then block.
And it's also probably worth talking about that the quality of the block here is also very important.
Yeah.
If the quality of my block is poor and it's too high and I see the net player kind of up here, I'm probably not going to chase that forward the whole way. I might still be here, see it's not so good, and then kind of retreat again and then get back ready on the defense. But if it is a good block and I see that net player starts to be more in this position, there's no reason for me to hang back in this position. I want to get into the net, I want to get the attack back.
Now, if you are at the net and you've managed to follow it in, you can play some little net shots, poke some out around. You could stop the rally and restart it there, or you can try and work your way back, gently sort of cooperatively hitting the shuttle back to keep the shuttle going, back into defensive positions and work your way back through the routine again. So Dean, we've now looked at how we're going to hit our drives and our blocks, and looked at some routines we can do for that. But obviously, we do want to utilize the back of the court. There might be opportunities where there's actually some space there. And even though hitting a high loopy shot is often seen as a negative, when there's space, that's what we want to be finding. So the relift comes into play here. How do we go about hitting this?
So again, the same setup, but there's two different ways that I kind of taught maybe with this one. The first one can feel that it's staying low, and it's more to do with the angle of the racket and purely wrist power. And obviously, again, we talked about the drive using a lot of power. This one, again, even more power, because we're not just sending the shuttle to the back, but we're sending it up. So the distance that the shuttle's traveling is a long way. That's one way. The other way is that some people feel like they like to have almost a bit of extension with their body because it naturally promotes that kind of down to up feel with the racket. And I think what we're trying to say with this is that neither are wrong. No. But just try and go away and practice kind of what works for you. For me personally, I quite like the one where I feel like I'm extending because it feels quite natural for the shot I'm trying to replicate, but it's not for everyone. And
it might be dependent on how high you want to hit this shuttle. If you're just wanting to sort of poke something over the top to the back, you can be a bit more restrictive. Whereas if you want to give yourself time, it might be you're trying to get really hit this shuttle high and you use the extension. So it's very much playing around and seeing which ones work for you in those scenarios.
And I think it's probably worth highlighting on both, whether you use the one where you straighten up or you stay low, it's still very much the power with the wrist. Yeah. So what we sometimes find again when people are trying to go to the back, we get this long arm swing and again, we don't have the same power. We're still looking to generate the power from this pull back and this wrist. It's just whether we're staying low or extending up with it.
And I think one point here worth going back to, Dean, is changing the racket angle to get it pointing upwards. Yep. How do we go about this, and how did something in the setup we spoke about help us with this?
It's more down to contact point. And obviously for the drives we're trying to hit nice and flat, so the contact point actually may feel a little bit more here. If we're trying to feel like we're lifting the shuttle up, it may well feel like we're trying to feel like we're extending more with this racket angle in front. It's not to say that you can't do it as you're closer, but you might have to manipulate the wrist a little bit more, whereas if you're making contact out here, it will almost feel like it naturally happens. So the angle of the racket will naturally sit in the upwards direction to promote the lift.
And that's why we get that elbow out, creating that space so you can do that. So we've looked at how we can start doing the relift. Obviously we want to now practice this. A good routine for this is actually the routine we've just been doing. The same setup where we have a player at the net, Dean is defensive position, hitting drives. We can do this in a couple of different stages. It might be you're just hitting drives and then every now and then relifting. It might be you do the whole lot, hitting drives, blocks and relifts and adding it all in together. What I'd say is once you've done that relift, you can stop the rally. Your partner, if they feel they can get back and hit it, can just knock the shuttle in for you to get back into drives, but don't feel like that partner has to get back, smash it. It's too much work for them to do. We want them prioritizing kind of being aggressive at the net.
So one key point here for the defender is to make sure that we are practicing this lift when we are under pressure. What we see a lot of is almost like the net player doesn't hit as good a shot and the shuttle's slower, and then we think, oh, I'll lift this one because it's easier. That's not what we're trying to achieve from this routine. The idea is that we're under pressure, net players really coming at us, and we're going over the top to utilize that space because that's where the gap is.
Now, Dean, last point, we've spoken about there being this gap at the back of the court. A lot of people are really thinking, well, we're on the attack here. Some guys at the back, someone's at the front. Why would there be a gap there?
So if they are using their rotation as they should be, the idea is if the net player is on the straight, the partner should be almost to looking to cover the cross court, maybe the block or the drive. And the reason they would be covering that is because it's a much faster shot to cover. So that's where the gap over the top comes in. However, if you are playing other people and that person is not pressing up on that side, you probably wouldn't favour the lift. You would be playing into space. And I think that's what we're trying to get across in this is even with defence, we have to have a reason as to why we're playing certain shots. We're not just reactive. We're not just hacking the shuttle back and hoping for the best. We're trying to structure it into space so we can get the attack back.
So we've gone through a variety of routines there to help you improve your defense, drives, relifts, blocks, the whole lot. But Dean, is there anything in particular, a bit of advice maybe you could give people to help them continue to improve?
I think it's really worth spending some time on the setup and the fundamentals that go with defense. A lot of defense is all about the setup. So if you get that bit right, the shots become a lot easier for you to execute.
And as always, if you liked this video, please hit the like and subscribe button and head over to our Instagram and give us a follow.